Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. As the Trump administration ramps up efforts to detain and deport undocumented immigrants, advocates are sounding the alarm over what they say are illegal tactics, inhumane conditions, and blatant discrimination against Black immigrants from across the diaspora. My guests this evening say those alleged violations are especially apparent in Maryland, and they are calling on lawmakers to push through immigration reform bills now before the Maryland State Legislature. For joining me to talk about this are CASA Legal Director Amr Frimpong and Policy Director Catherine Jackson. Ladies, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Sure thing. Let me share just a few fast facts with you before we get into this conversation. There are approximately 5 million Black immigrants living in the U.S. 3.7 million of them are non-citizens, and about just under 600,000 are undocumented. And Maryland has the highest share of Black immigrants in the DMV. As of 2023, they were surpassed by New York in that particular case. There's a lot to talk about tonight. Let's talk about some of the actions this week in Annapolis. There was a rally at noon today that demanded immigrant protections in Maryland. Can we first talk about the bills and who you believe those immigrants need protection from?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I can get us started. Actually, just this morning, we had a very big event on Lawyers Mall right in front of the State House. We were calling on legislators to pass 3 critical bills that are going to at least try to slow down mass deportations and Trump's agenda from happening in Maryland. So there's 3 bills. The first one is the Protecting Sensitive Locations Act. It's an emergency bill. Essentially, what it's going to do is it's going to require guidance and policy limiting ICE access into what we call sensitive locations, schools, courthouses, hospitals, right? The places where people should be able to go and get their basic needs met without fearing getting separated from their family, right? There was a federal policy in place that was rescinded on day 1 of the Trump administration. So now our state protections are more important than ever. The second bill that we've been focusing on is a bill called the Maryland Data Privacy Act. This is a bill that's going to stop ICE and other federal agencies, for that matter, from having access to our state and local agency data without a warrant. Some of you all may have seen in Maryland, ICE had previously sort of famously gotten access to the MVA database and used driver's license information to find people and deport them. And actually, because of a very big community effort, we were able to stop that in 2021. But it does not cover all of the rest of the state agencies, right? So we don't want ICE digging into our healthcare department data, our labor department data, right? And using that information to find people and target them and deport them. And then finally, the last bill that we are focused on is a bill called the Values Act. Essentially what this bill does is it ends 287G agreements in the state of Maryland.
It ends what? Say again?
287G agreements. And for those who are not familiar with 287G agreements, these are agreements that local jurisdictions can enter into that allow police officers to be deputized as ICE agents. So in short, what 287G does is it turns police officers into ICE agents. We want that to stop in Maryland. There are now 6 counties in total that have agreements with ICE to deputize their police officers. We want to shut those down, and we want to make sure that no other counties are entering into those agreements. So those are the 3 bills. And one of the reasons why we were there today in particular, and as you just framed up, Harold, is immigration is a Black issue. All of these things are impacting our people, more than anybody else, we are more likely to be stopped by police. We're more likely to have interactions with law enforcement to begin with, and therefore more likely to get into that deportation machine and be transferred to ICE and ultimately deported. So this is an issue that's going to be impacting everyone, but especially our community.
You said immigration is a Black issue, and while I, don't disagree, what we have seen since Inauguration Day is an emphasis, at least anecdotally and through media coverage, of it being truly a Brown issue, particularly as it relates to uh, alleged Venezuelan gang members. That's been the big story this week. There have been many actions in Virginia. There have been actions in Maryland, particularly north of Baltimore and Reisterstown. But all of these people are not Black. The people that we have seen the most focus on have been Brown people. And so, how do you square what we've seen with the diversity of it affecting all kinds of people of color?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. What's happening with immigration is an attack on people of all backgrounds, right? Of all people of color broadly. The reason why I say immigration is a Black issue is because oftentimes Black immigrants are completely excluded from the national conversation on immigration, right? And the focus has been, and in many ways rightfully so, but the focus has been on Latinos, non-Black Latinos, right? It's been very focused on the border in a way that actually erases the impact that's happening on our community, right? So TPS for Venezuela was canceled, right? But also
Temporary protected
TPS
status.
for Haiti. Yeah, temporary protected status for Haiti was just canceled, right? We're going to have a big group of Haitians who had protection from deportation, who had their work permits, who were fleeing their home country because it was no longer safe for them to return to, who are now going to be stripped of that protection, right? And be forced back into the shadows, and then be targeted and deported, right, by ICE.
You were nodding your head earlier. Your thoughts about what Catherine was just sharing with us.
And so, obviously, as Kat shared, it really is a complete misconception, right? And it has to be remembered that when we erase Black immigrants from the immigration narrative, it makes it easier for the government's abuses against our community to go unchecked, right? When you leave Haitian migrants out of the conversation, out of the narrative, it makes it easier for the government to cancel TPS. It makes it easier for the government to prevent Haitians from coming inside the country because it appears that no one cares, and it appears that no one is advocating for those communities. So it's important not only to include Black immigrants into the narrative, but it's important to center, right? Because oftentimes what we see is that the consequences against Black immigrants is much harsher than against our non-Black immigrants counterparts. What do I mean by that? I mean, typically what we see in the immigration legal system is that Black immigrants enter deportation proceedings based on having contact with a criminal legal system. When you base an immigration legal system on a criminal legal system that we all know is racist, is anti-Black, over polices, over charges, over convicts, over sentences, Black people, what you're going to see is an immigration legal system that essentially does the same, right? And so our Black immigrant members are, typically facing harsher consequences because their deportation proceedings are based on criminal legal system contact. The other misconception that it would be remiss of me if I did not mention is that, there's a narrative of, and I believe, right, you kind of stated it in the beginning, that Trump's agenda is mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. That is false. It is deportation of all immigrants, period, right? And so we're seeing people who have green cards, people who have asylum status, people who have work visas, student visas, people who are here lawfully are being targeted by the government and are being pushed out of the country. So we need to make sure that we're painting it completely, as this is not a Latino issue, right? And this is not an undocumented immigrant issue. This is an immigrant issue, period.
To that point, Maryland Governor Wes Moore said in the early days of the Trump administration, as it relates to cooperation of at least state police, that they would not be cooperating with ICE to identify and to detain or assist in the deportation of undocumented immigrants. Are you encouraged, Catherine, that all of the bills that you mentioned, Senate Bill 977, Senate Bill 828, and the House Bill 1222, all of them made it through crossover day 2 days ago and are scheduled for hearings?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, it's a major victory that we got these 3 bills through at least one chamber before crossover day, right? That means we have a fighting chance to get them to the finish line. Now we have until April 7th, right? Because we have a short 90-day session. We have until April 7th to get it passed in the opposite chamber. What I know is that these bills are being led by some of the biggest leaders in Annapolis, the chair of the Black Caucus, the chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, which, by the way, tons of Black leadership who are leading these bills, right? So that right there is signaling that this is a priority to legislators. I think that it doesn't mean that we're not going to have to put up a fight. We need everyone calling their legislators, making as much noise as possible to get it to the finish line. And if we can get that done, I have no doubt that our governor will sign these into law. It's quite powerful, I think, to have a governor who also has immigrant heritage, who also has Black immigrant heritage, right? He has some Jamaican and Cuban heritage. He has stood with us on many different issues in the past, and I have no doubt that he will now. When it comes to police collaboration with ICE, actually one of the amazing things that we were able to accomplish, again, through just very powerful community campaigns, is we were able to pass in 2021 the Dignity Not Detention Act. So police officers in Maryland already cannot ask about immigration status. We see our neighbors in Virginia have just entered into a statewide 287G agreement to allow their police officers to become ICE. Now, I don't believe that will happen at the state level, right? But it doesn't mean that we don't need to put up a fight to make sure our localities, right, don't still enter into these agreements. If someone is in Montgomery County where they may not have a 287G agreement, but is driving into Frederick, right, they're going to have different experiences with law enforcement. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
Not to mention, as you mentioned, for example, in Virginia, when you talk about the entirety of the Commonwealth, this may be applicable to the state troopers, but sheriff's departments run their own departments. Particularly when they are the only law enforcement entity in a particular area. not the state police notwithstanding. So you do make a great point. Hold this, ladies. We are going to continue this conversation in just a bit, but don't forget you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the detaining and deportation of undocumented immigrants under the Trump administration. My guests are CASA Legal Director Amma Frimpong and Catherine Jackson. She is the Policy Director for CASA. I do want to talk about some of the allegations of poor treatment at the federal detention center in downtown Baltimore. Amma, what is it that CASA is alleging? What is it that you're hearing from those who may be detained there?
Yeah, so over the past month or so, maybe month and a half, we have verified reports of just egregious conditions within the holding room there. So as a little bit of context, right, ICE is prohibited from operating detention centers in Maryland, okay? And they are prohibited from contracting with local jails to be able to do the same, right? And so what that has meant over the last 3 or 4 years is that when ICE arrests someone, they take them to the Hopkins Plaza, 31 Hopkins Plaza for processing, right? This is meant to be a temporary holding space. By their own detention standards, they are not supposed to hold individuals there for more than 12 hours, right? Again, this is meant to be a temporary processing site. So over the last few years, the way that things have operated, they arrest someone, they take the person there temporarily for processing, and then transfer them outside of the state to an actual detention center, typically Pennsylvania or Virginia. What we have seen in the last few weeks, thanks to the mass detention campaign that started January 20th, what we have seen is ICE is just arresting people left and right? Without regard of what they're going to do with these individuals once they arrest them. In their aggressive over-enforcement actions, they are arresting people, taking them to Hopkins Plaza holding room and holding them there for days at a time. We have verified reports of up to 9 days. Again, keep in mind, this is meant to be a whole, essentially think of like a small concrete cage, right? Where you're supposed to hold people for hours. And so there are no cots, mattresses, there is no shower, right? There is no medical care. People are literally being held in the same clothes they were arrested in for days at a time, not allowed to shower. We have, sick individuals, right, with HIV, hypertension, diabetes, who don't have access to medication. And when their loved ones try to bring them the medication, ICE turns them away, right? So folks who are in these holding rooms, there is no access to loved ones, no access to lawyers. ICE is keeping people out of those spaces. So we began to receive reports of this, I would say about the second week of February. Several attorneys have come forward to share their stories of their clients who were held there. I'm not sure whether this is known. CASA operates a raid hotline, right? Such that whenever someone is arrested by ICE, their loved ones can call the hotline to report the arrest. And so we have also independently verified the situations with callers, right? And so again, what we are seeing are just blatant human rights abuses based on this mass detention campaign, the overcrowding that we're seeing right here is happening everywhere else, right? It is happening everywhere else. And so this is really, we're seeing this as a human rights crisis, right? That honestly can and should be stopped by ICE just scaling back, halting this senseless mass enforcement that they have been engaging in the last couple of months.
Before you continue, you mentioned the raid hotline. Do you have that information that you can share now?
Yes, I do. I should know it off the top of my head, but I do not. It is 1-888-214-6016. And so anyone can call to report ICE activity that they see, and CASA responds rapidly to whatever that activity was.
So again, that's 1-888-214-6016.
That is correct.
Okay. I'll make sure that when this is posted on our website, I will post that along with some other CASA information. I'm assuming, based on what you've already shared, that your office has had an opportunity to speak with the legal representatives of some of the detainees.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So that suggests that although families have not had access to any of the detainees, that legal representatives have. With that said, based on the reporting, what can be done about that? Is this another one of the dozens of federal challenges that you believe will be going through the courts like so many others since the beginning of the Trump administration?
Yes. So we know that our partners, and we are working closely with our partners, we are absolutely suing, right? We need to send a strong message that this is not okay. And ICE must seize these actions. So yes, there is litigation that is happening.
Mm-hmm. But as you also know, the immigration czar has been heard as it relates to the Venezuelan deportees, that no matter what the courts say, he doesn't say he doesn't care, or he said we don't care. The quote was, "We are still coming." So if that is the attitude of the Trump administration, what do you think this portends for for the Black immigrants who may, as you've already mentioned, may not necessarily be on the big radar, but still being impacted by these policies?
Listen, what is happening right now is completely unprecedented in so many ways. Things that are clearly unconstitutional, that are clearly illegal, right? I think, sure, I guess they can declare that they are not going to follow federal law, or not going to follow court ruling. I think what our strategy has been, and what you'll see, and you may know that the CASA sued the administration for trying to cancel birthright citizenship. We've also sued the administration for their cancellation of TPS for Venezuela. And we are on our way to likely sue the administration for additional cancellations of other humanitarian programs. Part of our strategy is to actually sue in multiple different places, in multiple different courts, right? And we have to do that in addition to also passing legislation, in addition to also continuing to provide services to individuals and information to individuals. And so right now, when we are in this space of sort of unprecedented time of, the highest leaders in our land not following the law, I think what we have to do is stick to what we know. We know what the Constitution says. And if they choose not to follow it, we will sue you again, over and over and over again. And I think, while there's been a lot of rhetoric around this, I think in reality, the practice of implementing, right, what the administration is saying is going to be a lot more difficult than they think it is. And we are going to work every single day to make sure that doesn't happen.
I'm going to ask you at least briefly to take off your legal director hat and put on your family hat. You are the daughter of immigrants, and I and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would be safe to assume that as a young person, since I'm the oldest one in the room right now, that you have friends and family and loved ones and people that you care about who are, no matter what their status are, they are part of the immigrant community. Is that accurate?
First, a very big correction. I'm not the daughter of immigrants. Yes, I am that too, but
Oh,
I
that's
myself
Catherine.
am an immigrant. Born
Oh,
and
okay.
raised
Well,
in Ghana, right? Born and raised in
okay.
Ghana. So this is not, right? When we talk about this, this isn't me, this isn't me with my lawyer hat, right? This is deeply personal, right? As
Yeah,
a
and that's what I
Black
was asking. And
immigrant
thank you for the
woman.
correction. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. No worries. As a Black immigrant woman, as the mother to a Black boy, right? To a Black son, like this is deeply personal. And every day I see my community being targeted, being terrorized by ICE, being targeted, being terrorized by the federal government, right? People are, of course, very afraid. My family is afraid. My neighbors are afraid. My community is afraid. But guess what? We're also powerful. And so it is remembering the fact that yes, we might be afraid, but we are also powerful as hell, and we will stand in that power and fight back with every single tool that we have available to us.
And this is the reason why I ask that specifically, and thank you again for for the correction, because I grew up in Prince George's County. My mother still lives there. I have seen the evolution of the population changing there. Lot, uh, my stepfather was from Nassau. He had dual citizenship, and we see a lot of West African immigrants in Prince George's County. You can't go into the grocery store without interacting with them. When I go to the car wash, all of the guys who are working to clean the cars, these are immigrants. And I even asked a month ago to the Latina lady behind the counter who takes my money and gives me my receipt. I asked her, because I've been going for years, and you establish a nodding relationship, an acquaintanceship with these people. And I just said, how are you feeling? And first of all, she was surprised that I asked, number one. And then, her response was, we're worried. And she said, we're worried that one day, a federal government bus is going to show up at the car wash. And not just for the brown people, but this is a serious thing. Can you go to the grocery store in New Carrollton, and are you concerned about one of those federal government buses pulling up at the grocery store in Lanham or New Carrollton or Hyattsville and loading up all the Black and brown people? And I think there are as you suggested, Amma, there are two issues. There's the legal side, but there is the humanity, or some would argue lack of, in this particular time.
Yeah, I thank you for raising that, and I think again, like the beauty of us living in Maryland, right? We see the truth, we know the truth, right? I think for a lot of people who don't have the good fortune of living in this state that is just, that has just such a large Black immigrants population and just large immigrants population, period, right? People see the news and you hear the rhetoric of the immigrants are this, the immigrants are that, right? It's us. We're the immigrants, right? It's the person at the car wash, it's the person at the store, it's your neighbor, right? It is us. So we see the truth, we know the truth. And I think, Kat might want to add on to this, but again, although that fear is there, we have really been focused on educating people, making sure that people know their rights, right? So that in the event that ICE does show up at the store trying to round up every Black and brown person that they see, which that is not out of the question, right? And again, Kat can speak more on that. But in the event that someone does encounter ICE, they know fundamental rights, right? You have the rights to remain silent, right? You do not have to answer ICE's questions. More often than not, and really almost 100% of the time, anything that you say, ICE will use against you, right? And then second, people understanding ICE cannot just walk into, absent very limited circumstances, right? ICE can't just walk into a private space looking to arrest me, looking to arrest you, right? They need your consent or they need a warrant that's signed by a judge, right? So we're making sure that people know, don't be intimidated just because you see someone coming in looking angry and wearing a uniform or a vest, right? You have rights and it's important to exercise those rights because we need to make sure that we're holding ICE accountable in every single way possible.
Kat, you, and as I said earlier, I got the Daughter of Immigrants information wrong, but the same question to you, in your circle of friends, what are those conversations like?
Yeah, I mean, I am the proud daughter of immigrants. My mom is from Trinidad and Tobago. My father was born in Guyana. They are amazing. They have sacrificed everything. I love them so much. My whole family, my big West Indian family. You know, as someone who was born here, I was born in Queens, New York, as someone who was born in the US and who has family members of a variety of different statuses. One thing I can say very confidently is that it is, and as Amma already spoke to, the level of fear in our community ranges no matter what your status is, right? And actually, there's a study that was done quite a while back that actually showed that even people who had, whether you were completely undocumented, whether you had temporary protected status, DACA, even if you had your green card, right, and you were legally able to be here under permanent status, that all of those individuals had the same fear of deportation, right? And I think that speaks to what is happening right now, right? Is that the Trump administration is supposedly focused on certain individuals, when in reality, like this broad targeting is a targeting of all of us, right? Of all of us, and if not us directly, right? Someone that we're close to, someone within arm's reach, right? And I think actually, Harold, you bringing up Prince George's County is really powerful because we have one of our largest welcome centers in Prince George's County in the heart of Langley Park. We have been organizing there for years and years and years. That's actually where CASA was born. in Prince George's County. And earlier today, some of our speakers in Annapolis, as we were doing our Black Advocacy Day, included two council members, Councilmember Oriada and Councilmember Bugay, who both have immigrant heritage, who are serving on the council, right? The Values Act is being led by the chair of the Prince George's County delegation, Delegate Nicole Williams, and shout out to her for her leadership. I think the Values Act is called the Values Act, really because of what you just alluded to, Harold, which is like, this is about humanity, right? Yeah. This is about making sure that our laws align with our values, right? And that is treating people with dignity and respect and care and treating people as people, right? And I think like I see that every day in my personal life. I see that with my family. I see that with my sister Amma and all of my friends, but also just in everyday workers, right? Like you mentioned, our people are on the front lines. We are in all of the essential jobs. We are working all night while people are sleeping. We are, teaching kids. We are caring for folks. You can't go to the doctor, right, without getting in touch with an immigrant from somewhere who is taking care of you, right? And then, as I just mentioned, right, we are also our lawmakers, right? We are just so ingrained into the fabric of every single part of our society, that when we have sweeping policies, devastating racist policies coming down from the federal administration, I don't think that people quite realize how much of the heart of this country is under attack. So I share on this sentiment. This is, it's professional, but more importantly, is very, very personal to us.
And with that said, based on what you shared earlier in this conversation about not just undocumented, but all immigrants, how do you know you are safe?
How do I know I'm safe? Oh, I am absolutely not safe, right? I mean, we as a person who derives citizenship from my father, right? One of the things that this government is doing is trying to take people's citizenship away, right? Finding reasons, finding ways, finding tactics to justify taking people's citizenship away and targeting people who are speaking out against the government's actions, right? That is what they are doing. Those are part of the tactics that they are using. And so, again, really wanting to underscore, right, the point of this is not an undocumented immigrant issue. This is an all of us issue. The kicker, right, though, is I'm not afraid, right? And I'm in this place of I will stand firm. I will stand on the side of what is right, just, moral, lawful, and fight back. Because it is so important that we all stand together and work together to be able to win, truly, right? To win, because our community is under attack and we cannot win with just one community. We all need to come together to make sure that we are fighting back in every single way possible.
What do you suggest in these last few minutes that someone who is concerned about being arrested, but they are working, say they're living in an apartment or they own a home or what have you, and they know that ICE is creeping around, what advice do you give them to address this? I know you said they can't come into your home, but beyond that, I mean, are you leaving your place and looking in the parking lot before you get into your car? What do you say?
Look, we are telling people to be vigilant, right? One thing that we are trying to make clear to people is like, look, you you still need to go about living your life, right? It is unfortunate that what the government is doing, really, their goal is to make us afraid. Their goal is to make us so afraid and so miserable that we give up and say, you know what, I'm just going to go back to my home country, right? We cannot give in to that. But we are saying to people, be vigilant, right? Be vigilant, one. And two, we are telling people, prepare what we call a family safety plan, right? Far too often, I'm encountering parents who went to work, were expecting to come back home that day, and ICE picked them up from the workplace, from the street, right? And they have kids, right? So in the event that you do encounter ICE and it does not end well, who is taking care of your kids? Who is picking up your kid from school that day? Who has access to your bank accounts to be able to buy groceries and pay their rent, right? Things like that. So we're really telling members of the community, now is the time to put a plan on paper such that if anything happens, right? If anything happens, you and your loved ones, and specifically your loved ones, are not going to be to, as much as possible, minimize and reduce the potential harm that your loved ones might face. It is real, the threat of family separation, right? It is so real, family separation that happens when ICE terrorizes us, right? But we must be prepared, and we must make sure, to the fullest extent possible, that our loved ones will be taken care of and will be protected, even if ICE harms us. And I know, right, we're very, very heavy on all things policy, all things organizing. Kat, would you like to speak more on that?
Now that you have the last word, Catherine, before we wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in addition to the best defense that people can have right now of just simply knowing your rights, and I want to encourage people. CASA has been leading Know Your Rights trainings. Make sure that you know your rights. We'll also go through that family preparedness training there. But in addition to that, it is critical that all of the protections that we do, we pair that with policy change, right? And all the time, everyone says immigration is a federal issue. There's nothing we can do at the state level. It's not true. There are tons of things we can do at the state level. And passing this legislation, making sure that we have policy in place to limit ICE going into these places, to limit ICE getting access to our data, to stop police officers from acting as ICE agents, right? Each of these pieces of legislation is going to help us be more protected, right? And our entire community be more protected. So right now, if you haven't already and you live in Maryland, right, regardless of what your immigration status is, you want to reach out to your legislators. Let them know today, you have until April 7th, let them know today that they need to vote yes on these 3 immigrant protection bills. If you don't know who your legislator is, you can go to mdelect.net. Again, that's mdelect.net. Type in your address and look at your state and senators and delegates, okay? Shoot them a quick email, give them a call, let them know how you're feeling right now, the anxiety that you're feeling, right? And let them know that they have to, there is no other option, right? There is no federal reform that's going to happen right now. And so their leadership is needed more than ever. So really grateful, Harold, for the opportunity.
Sure thing. And thank you so much for your insight, your intellect, and your vigor in trying to address this issue for the community. I appreciate your time. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, March 20th. I'm Harold Fisher.